They mock her right up until the monsters show up. The colony was a sprawling marvel of human engineering, a shining collection of steel towers and glass domes perched on the edge of a barren, red-tinted world. Outside, the sky glimmered with twin suns, and distant moons floated silently above the jagged horizon. It was beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. One mistake here could mean disaster. Lyra's lab sat at the far end of the scientific wing, a small room filled with blinking consoles, holographic displays, and machines that hummed with unseen energy. To anyone else it looked chaotic, almost reckless, but to her every wire, every screen, every stray notebook had its place. "Lyra," a voice called, sharp and mocking, breaking her concentration. She turned to see Dr. Havorson leaning against the doorway of her lab, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Still chasing ghosts, I see. Another report about some invisible monsters." Lyra's jaw tightened. She had grown used to this kind of ridicule. Dr. Havorson, along with most of the senior scientists, didn't take her work seriously. She was young, unproven, and dared to think in ways they didn't understand. "They're not ghosts," she replied evenly. "They're energy signatures. They exist, and I can prove it." Havorson laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet lab. "Energy signatures that nobody else can see? Sounds like fairy tales. Maybe you should focus on something practical, like recalibrating the oxygen filters or checking the solar arrays." Lyra didn't respond. She let him leave, his laughter trailing down the hallway like smoke. She turned back to her instruments, her fingers dancing over the holographic keyboard. The data was clear. Something was out there, something beyond the colony, something ancient and powerful. And she was the only one who had noticed. Despite the ridicule, Lyra found comfort in her solitude. Most people avoided her, whether out of mockery or simple indifference. The isolation was easier than enduring constant criticism. It gave her time to think, to experiment, to pursue ideas that others deemed impossible. Her latest project was ambitious. She was tracking unusual energy fluctuations at the edge of the colony's sensor range. For months, she had noticed tiny anomalies, brief pulses of energy that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. She hypothesized that these were signs of creatures from another dimension, beings that existed in spaces humans could not yet perceive. Tonight, she hoped to get a clearer reading. The lab was quiet except for the steady hum of her machines. The twin suns had set, leaving the sky awash with stars and the faint glow of Nova Horizon's artificial lights. Lyra adjusted the sensitivity of the energy scanner, leaning closer as the holographic display flickered with strange, rapid pulses. Her heart beat faster. These pulses were stronger than she had seen before. They weren't just random spikes. They had form, movement, intent. Lyra's eyes widened. She whispered to herself, "They're real. They're really out there." A soft chime signaled an incoming message on her console. She glanced at it. It was from her colleague, Jaren, one of the few people who believed in her research. "Lyra, are you still in the lab? I'm seeing the same patterns you reported. Meet me outside near the observation deck." Lyra smiled faintly. Even if the rest of the colony mocked her, Jaren understood. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the observation deck, a platform jutting from the main colony dome that offered a sweeping view of the red plains below. When she arrived, Jaren was already there, adjusting a compact device that hummed with energy. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Everyone else is laughing at the idea that we're being watched." "I had to see for myself," Lyra replied. "There's something out there, Jaren. I can feel it." Together, they calibrated the device, scanning the horizon. The first minutes passed with nothing but the distant flicker of the colony's lights. Then, the display lit up with unusual readings. Blotches of energy shifted and moved against the dark landscape, shapes that seemed to defy the natural laws of physics. "They're not just energy," Jaren whispered. "They have mass, shape, intelligence." Lyra nodded. "Exactly what I've been saying. They're observing us, waiting. But why?" Their conversation was cut short by a loud alarm from the colony's control center. A broadcast message crackled over the speaker system, full of panic and confusion. "Attention all personnel, unidentified objects detected beyond the perimeter. All teams prepare for immediate observation and containment." Lyra's pulse quickened. She knew this moment might come, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight that followed. Outside the observation deck, through the reinforced glass, shadows moved across the red plains. They were enormous, creatures unlike anything humans had encountered before. Limbs as thick as colony towers, eyes glowing with faint, eerie light, and bodies that shimmered as though they existed partially out of phase with reality. People began to gather on the observation deck, drawn by curiosity and fear. The mocking laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by stunned silence. "They're huge," someone muttered. "They're real," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "I told you." Jaren looked at her, awe and fear mingling in his expression. "We need to warn the colony, now." Lyra nodded. She didn't hesitate. She activated the emergency communication channels, her voice clear over the panic-filled corridors. "This is Lyra Kale. I am confirming the presence of unknown entities beyond the colony perimeter. All personnel follow standard defense protocols. Do not engage without orders." As she spoke, the creatures moved closer, their massive forms rippling through the dim red light. The colony's defenses, untested against such beings, seemed almost trivial. Still, Lyra remained focused. She knew that panic would not save anyone, only human ingenuity and courage could. Some of the onlookers, those who had mocked her before, now stared with wide eyes. Lyra felt a surge of vindication but pushed it aside. There was no time for pride. She had warned them, and now they had to act. "Jaren, we need to gather all sensor data," she said. "If we can understand their movement patterns, maybe we can predict their next step." Together, they worked furiously, compiling every piece of information they could find. Lyra's mind raced, combining theory with observation, hoping to find a weakness, a way to protect the colony. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. By the time the twin suns rose again, casting pale light over the red plains, the creatures had receded slightly, almost as if testing the colony's defenses. Lyra knew they would return, and likely in greater numbers. Exhausted, she finally allowed herself to sit, leaning against the cold metal of the observation deck. Around her, the colony was alive with fear, but also a glimmer of hope. The people had been shaken, but human resilience had not broken. Jaren rested a hand on her shoulder. "You were right," he said simply. "We should have listened sooner." Lyra smiled faintly, though the weight of what lay ahead pressed on her. "It doesn't matter if they listened or not," she said. "What matters is that we're ready, and we will be. Humans have always found a way." In that moment, Lyra realized that her isolation, her ridicule, and her persistence had all led her to this point. She was the outsider, yes, but sometimes, being the outsider was exactly what humanity needed. The horizon remained quiet for now, but deep down, Lyra knew the monsters would return. And when they did, the colony would face a test unlike any other. Yet she was certain of one thing: human courage, ingenuity, and determination would not fail. For the first time, the mocking voices seemed distant and irrelevant. The monsters were real, the threat was undeniable, and Lyra was ready. And that was enough. The red plains beyond Nova Horizon Colony lay quiet, almost serene, under the twin suns of the alien world. But the peace was deceptive. Lyra Kale stood on the observation deck, her eyes scanning the horizon, heart pounding in anticipation. She knew the creatures would return. She just didn't know when or how many. The colony's alarm systems had been activated overnight, and soldiers, engineers, and scientists patrolled the perimeter. For the first time, most people listened when Lyra spoke. Her warnings were no longer ignored, though some still whispered doubts behind their hands. Lyra didn't care about whispers now. Evidence was enough. "Lyra," Jaren said, handing her a small device that pulsed with faint blue light. "The energy readings are spiking again. Whatever they are, they're moving closer." Lyra took it and studied the display. The readings matched the patterns she had predicted. "They're not wandering randomly," she said. "They're observing, they're testing the perimeter, they know we're here." A rumble vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. At first it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it grew quickly, shaking the observation deck. People gasped, clutching railings and walls. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her eyes narrowing. Through the reinforced glass, the shadows of massive creatures appeared at the horizon. They moved in a strange, fluid way, their forms almost glimmering as if partially invisible. Their limbs were enormous, and each step left deep impressions in the red soil. A low, resonant growl echoed across the plains. It was a sound humans had never heard before, and it carried a strange intelligence, a sense of awareness that made the hairs on the back of Lyra's neck rise. Panic spread quickly. Security teams rushed to their stations, drawing weapons and readying defensive systems. Lights flashed across the colony as emergency protocols activated. People who had mocked Lyra before now looked at her with awe and fear. They're huge, one technician muttered, eyes wide. What are we supposed to do? Stay calm, Lyra called over the crowd. Her voice was steady, firm. Panic won't save anyone. We need to observe and understand their behavior first. Let's see what we're dealing with. Jaren glanced at her, admiration shining in his eyes. You really believed this from the beginning? Lyra gave him a small nod. Yes, and now it's real. Time to act. The first creature stepped closer, and its full size became apparent. It towered over the colony's towers, its skin shimmering like liquid metal. Its eyes glowed faintly, intelligent and calculating. The air seemed to ripple around it, and for a moment the colony felt unbearably small, fragile. Focus on the scanners, Lyra ordered. Track its movement patterns, predict its next step. The observation deck's instruments beeped and hummed, plotting trajectories and energy spikes. Lyra's mind raced, connecting her theories with real-world data. These creatures were not mindless, they were evaluating, testing. Why here? Jaren asked quietly. Why our colony? Resources, Lyra said. Energy signatures in the planet, maybe even in the colony itself. They could be attracted to power or curiosity. Some things just move toward intelligence. A sudden crash echoed from the southern perimeter. Security teams reported the first attack. One of the colony's supply domes had been breached. The massive creatures had struck, not out of hunger, but as a test. Evacuate personnel from the outer domes, Lyra shouted. We need to minimize casualties while we analyze them. People scrambled, moving supplies, barricading areas, and activating emergency shields. The creatures paused, watching the colony's activity, seemingly intrigued by the human response. They're learning, Lyra whispered. They're studying us just as much as we're studying them. The second creature moved with terrifying speed. It leapt across the red plains, landing with enough force to shake the ground. The colony's defensive drones fired, beams of energy cutting through the air, but the creatures barely flinched. They're too strong for conventional weapons, a soldier muttered, backing away. Lyra clenched her fists. We don't fight like humans fight normally, we fight smart. She grabbed her tablet and began coordinating the colony's teams. Engineers were sent to reinforce weak points, scientists to monitor energy fluctuations, and security to set traps designed from her theories about interdimensional energy manipulation. We'll use what we know against them, Lyra said to Jaren. Human ingenuity, pattern recognition, adaptive thinking, that's our advantage. Hours passed as the creatures tested the colony's defenses. Lyra and her team studied every move, every pattern. They noticed the creatures avoided certain energy fields, paused at specific types of structures, and reacted violently to intense light pulses. They're cautious, Lyra said. They're testing boundaries. If we understand those boundaries, we can control the battlefield. The creatures retreated slightly as the colony's defenses adapted. Lyra saw it as a small victory, a sign that humans could survive this encounter. But then, a young technician cried out. One of the creatures had breached an inner dome where civilians had taken refuge. Security teams scrambled to contain it, and Lyra realized the creatures were unpredictable. Understanding them wasn't enough. They had to act fast to protect lives. Lead them away from the civilians, Lyra commanded. Use the automated drones to create a barrier. We can guide them, not just block them. She and Jaren coordinated a daring plan. Using the colony's drones and energy projectors, they created a path that would funnel the creature away from people and back toward an open testing zone they had prepared for emergencies. It worked, though not without tension. The creature resisted at first, twisting and charging, testing the barriers. But gradually it followed the projected path, guided by the human strategy. Lyra's pulse raced as she watched it move. They're responding to strategy, she whispered. They're adapting. Humans aren't just fighting, they're teaching them how to interact. By the time the twin suns rose again, the immediate threat had been contained. The creatures retreated beyond the horizon, leaving the colony battered but intact. People cheered quietly, exhausted but relieved. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. The first encounter had ended without catastrophe. Jaren clapped her on the shoulder. You were right all along. Your predictions, your theories, they worked. Lyra shook her head. It wasn't just me. The colony worked together. Humans adapt. We think, we plan, we survive. That's what makes us strong. Despite the relief, Lyra knew the threat was far from over. The creatures had returned, yes, but they had observed, learned, and would come back smarter. And the colony needed to prepare. That evening, Lyra returned to her lab, exhausted but focused. She examined every piece of data from the encounter, searching for patterns, weaknesses, and clues. Every movement of the creatures, every reaction to human defenses was recorded. The more she studied, the more confident she became. "They'll come back," she said softly to herself, "and we'll be ready." Outside, the red plains glimmered under the twin suns' fading light. The wind carried faint tremors from the creatures' distant retreat. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the monsters lingered, curious and calculating. They had learned that humans were not weak. They had learned that humans could fight with intelligence, courage, and unity. And Lyra smiled faintly, knowing that humanity's greatest strength wasn't weapons or technology. It was the mind, the ability to think, to adapt, to rise above fear. Nova Horizon Colony had survived its first encounter. And in the shadow of that survival, a new sense of hope and determination took root. Humanity would not only endure, it would fight, and it would grow stronger. Lyra turned back to her instruments, scanning the horizon once more. The first encounter was over, but the real test was just beginning. And she, the outsider once mocked, would lead them through it. The colony woke to a red dawn, tinged with the smoke and dust of the previous night's attacks. Nova Horizon's towers had survived, but the damage was visible. Broken energy panels, scorched walls, and deep impressions in the red soil where the creatures had tested their strength. People moved cautiously, their faces etched with exhaustion and worry. Lyra Kale stood on the observation deck, her eyes scanning the horizon as she made notes on her tablet. The creatures had retreated for now, but their presence was undeniable. Their strategy was clear: test, observe, and adapt. And Lyra knew that humans needed to do the same. "Morning, Lyra," Jaren greeted her, arriving with a thermos of warm coffee. His uniform was streaked with dust from the outer perimeter patrols. "Looks like they didn't come back last night." "Not yet," Lyra said, her voice calm but determined. "But they will. And when they do, we need a plan that's stronger than walls and weapons. We need strategy." Jaren handed her the coffee, and they watched the red plains in silence. The colony's outer defenses had been reinforced overnight. Automated turrets, energy shields, and sensor arrays now formed a complex network designed to anticipate the creatures' movements. Yet Lyra knew that raw strength alone would not be enough. "People are scared," Jaren said quietly. "Some of the senior officers want to evacuate." "Evacuate?" Lyra repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's not the human way. We survive, we adapt, we fight smart. Running doesn't solve anything." Jaren nodded. "You're right, but they need guidance. They need to see the bigger picture." And that was exactly what Lyra intended to provide. She spent the morning coordinating teams, gathering scientists, engineers, and security personnel in the main operations center. Using the data from the previous encounter, Lyra demonstrated the creatures' patterns, their avoidance of certain energy fields, their responses to movement and light, and the way they tested weak points rather than attacking indiscriminately. "Observe first," she told the group. "Understand the threat. Every action we take should teach us something. Every movement they make is information we can use." A young engineer who had laughed at Lyra just days before raised his hand hesitantly. "You mean fight them by learning how they react?" "Yes," Lyra said firmly. "Humans are not the strongest in physical power, but we are the smartest. Strategy, adaptability, and courage, those are our greatest weapons." By midday, the colony had shifted from fear to preparation. Teams were assigned to monitor specific sectors of the perimeter, while mobile response units patrolled the plains beyond. Engineers worked on experimental energy barriers designed to slow the creatures, while scientists analyzed every pulse and vibration detected by the sensors. Lyra moved between teams, offering guidance and encouragement. People who had once mocked her now followed her instructions without question. There was respect in their eyes, a recognition that her predictions had been correct. And yet Lyra remained focused on the real task, survival and understanding. Hours passed and the tension grew. The colony waited, and then a ripple of movement appeared on the horizon. "They're back," Jaren said, pointing to the faint shimmer at the edge of the sensor range. Lyra's eyes narrowed. The creatures moved with more confidence this time, as if learning from the previous encounter. They split into smaller groups, testing multiple points of the perimeter simultaneously. The humans had to react quickly. "Activate the barriers," Lyra commanded. "Coordinate the drones, force them toward the open testing zone, minimize civilian exposure." The response was immediate. Energy fields flared to life, drones swooped across the plains, and human teams moved with precision. The creatures adapted quickly, altering their approach and testing weaknesses in the new defenses. "They're clever," one soldier muttered, awe in his voice. "Almost intelligent." "They are intelligent," Lyra replied, "and that's why we have to be smarter." Observe, adapt, anticipate. The first skirmish began near a supply dome. A creature charged, its massive limbs shattering walls, but automated drones diverted its path, forcing it toward a reinforced testing area. Lyra's team monitored energy signatures, noting how the creature avoided certain zones and reacted violently to bright light pulses. "Jaren, mark every reaction," she said. "We'll use this data to predict their next move." The humans began to see a pattern. The creatures were not mindless monsters. They were cautious, curious, and adaptive. Each attack taught them something new, but it also revealed vulnerabilities. Lyra's strategy was simple but effective: use knowledge as a weapon. By midday, the colony had contained several creatures in controlled zones. Human teams worked together, reinforcing barriers, coordinating movements, and improvising solutions. Even civilians were involved, helping with emergency protocols, clearing paths, and providing logistical support. "They're responding to us," Jaren said, amazement in his voice. "Our actions are influencing them." Lyra nodded. "Exactly. Humans are adaptable. Every move we make teaches them and teaches us. That's how we survive, that's how we win." Despite the success, the tension was far from over. The creatures had begun to display more aggressive behavior, testing the outermost defenses and probing weak points with increased frequency. One massive beast attacked the power generators, cutting off energy to half the colony. Lyra and her team had to improvise quickly. "Divert power to the emergency generators," she shouted. "Deploy the drones to guide it away." The humans moved with coordination, guiding the creature into a reinforced zone where its attacks would do minimal damage. The energy barriers held, and the creature eventually retreated, leaving behind a trail of flattened soil and shattered structures. Breathing heavily, Lyra watched the aftermath. People around her were tired, but their faces showed determination. They were no longer afraid of the unknown. They were ready to face it. Jaren looked at her. "You've changed everything. People are scared, yes, but they're not hopeless anymore. They're learning." Lyra smiled faintly. "That's the human way. We adapt, we survive, we improve. Fear is temporary. Ingenuity lasts." As the day turned to night, Lyra returned to her lab. She examined the data from the encounters, refining models, predicting movements, and designing new strategies. Each piece of information brought her closer to understanding the creatures and how to defend the colony. Outside, the red plains glimmered under the twin moons. The creatures moved in the distance, watching, learning, and preparing. Lyra knew they would return stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. But the colony was no longer unprepared. Humans had risen to the challenge. They had fought with intelligence, courage, and unity. Lyra leaned over her console, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of holographic displays. "We've held them off today," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll be ready again, and the day after that we'll be stronger." Somewhere in the distance, a creature roared, a sound that shook the ground and echoed across the plains. But Lyra felt no fear. She had seen humanity's strength, and she knew that together they could face anything. The colony slept that night with a sense of cautious hope. They had survived the first major wave, and they had learned. Lyra walked the observation deck one last time, watching the shadows on the plains. The creatures were patient, intelligent, and persistent, but so were humans. And in the quiet of the red world, under the glow of twin moons, Lyra made a silent promise. Nova Horizon Colony would not only survive, it would adapt, endure, and triumph. The rising tension had revealed one truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not firepower, it was the mind, the courage to act, and the ability to learn. And Lyra Kale, the outsider once mocked, would lead them through the challenges ahead. The creatures would return. That was certain, but so would human ingenuity, determination, and bravery. And that was a force even the monsters could not ignore. The red plains beyond Nova Horizon Colony were quiet, almost deceptively calm, as Lyra Kale stood on the observation deck. The creatures had retreated after the previous day's skirmishes, but the air carried a tension that was impossible to ignore. The colony had survived, yes, but only barely. Lyra knew that their survival would not last if they waited passively. Lyra, Jaren said, approaching with a tablet in hand, the creatures aren't just retreating, they're regrouping. Their energy patterns suggest they're planning their next attack. Lyra studied the readings. The patterns were deliberate, organized, almost tactical. They've learned from yesterday, she said. They're not just testing anymore, they're planning. Jaren nodded grimly, and if we wait for them, we'll be reacting, not controlling. Exactly, Lyra said. It's time to take the fight to them, but carefully. We don't need to destroy them. We need to control their movements, learn their behavior, and protect the colony. Lyra convened a meeting with the colony's leadership and key teams. Engineers, security personnel, and scientists crowded into the operations center, their faces drawn with fatigue and determination. Lyra laid out a plan. We've survived by reacting, she began. But now we strike strategically. We'll use their curiosity against them. We'll create zones of energy fields, guided by drones, to lead them where we want. Our weapons will focus on distraction and containment, not destruction. The moment we force them into predictable paths, we control the battlefield. Some of the senior officers still looked skeptical, but the younger teams, inspired by Lyra's courage and knowledge, nodded in agreement. For once, the colony acted as a unified force, each person understanding their role in the fight ahead. By midday, preparations were complete. Drones buzzed above the red plains, barriers of energy fields hummed along the perimeter, and the mobile response teams took positions. Lyra herself coordinated from the observation deck, watching every movement of the distant shadows. They're approaching, Jaren said, his voice tense. Through the observation deck's reinforced glass, the creatures became visible once more. They moved with confidence and intelligence, spreading out across the plains in multiple directions. Lyra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with focus. This was the moment to test human ingenuity. Deploy the first wave of drones, she ordered. Guide them toward the containment zones. Remember, every move is a lesson. Every reaction teaches us something new. The drones swooped down, emitting bright pulses of light. One of the larger creatures hesitated, then shifted its path, almost as if curious. Lyra noted every reaction, every deviation from expected behavior. They respond to stimuli, she said quietly. We're not just defending, we're teaching them the boundaries. As the creatures approached, the humans implemented their plan fully. Energy barriers rose to funnel the creatures, creating predictable pathways. Drones and light projectors guided them with precision. The creatures tested the barriers, clawing and striking, but each response reinforced Lyra's predictions. Keep them moving, she called. Do not let them break free of the zones. Patience is our weapon. One massive creature, larger than any seen before, charged toward a dome where civilians had been evacuated. Drones darted in front, creating a visual distraction, while energy barriers redirected it toward an open testing field. The creature struggled against the constraints, but eventually it followed the guided path, its movements deliberate but contained. Jaren watched in awe. I can't believe it, they're following our instructions in a way. Yes, Lyra replied. Humans are the masters of adaptation. We're not the strongest, but we're the smartest. We shape the battlefield and they respond. As the day progressed, the humans continued their strategic offensive. Each encounter taught them something new. Creatures reacted violently to sudden light surges, avoided certain energy frequencies, and hesitated near unpredictable movements. Lyra incorporated these lessons into real-time adjustments, guiding teams across the colony. A smaller team of engineers had created temporary energy traps, designed to immobilize creatures long enough for observation. Lyra watched as a medium-sized creature triggered one of these traps, its massive body frozen in place. Drones monitored it while scientists collected data on its energy signature. This is incredible, Jaren whispered. We can study them without risking lives. Exactly, Lyra said. Knowledge is our weapon. Understanding their behavior gives us power beyond brute force. By late afternoon, the humans had achieved several minor victories. Creatures were being led into zones where damage could be minimized. Drones and barriers guided their movements, and the colony's perimeter remained largely intact. The humans had shifted from defense to controlled engagement, using intelligence to shape the outcome. Yet, despite the success, Lyra knew the creatures were learning too. They tested the zones more aggressively, attempting new approaches, probing weak points. The humans had to adapt quickly or risk being overwhelmed. Coordinate the second wave, Lyra ordered. Use the data from the first encounter, anticipate their movements, and guide them into the reinforced traps. The response was almost seamless. Humans moved with precision, combining strategy, courage, and adaptability. Drones shifted dynamically, energy barriers adjusted in real time, and mobile teams redirected creatures as needed. The creatures fought back, of course, but every aggressive action revealed vulnerabilities. Hours passed in a tense, calculated battle. The horizon shimmered with the movement of creatures and drones, energy barriers flaring against the alien sunlight. Lyra remained at the observation deck, monitoring patterns, predicting behaviors, and adjusting strategies. Finally, one of the larger creatures charged at a reinforced testing zone. Lyra gave the order, activate the full energy pulse. A wave of energy surged from the colony, interacting with the creature's form. It faltered, staggered, and retreated toward the plains. The humans had achieved a major victory without harming the creatures permanently. They had demonstrated control, teaching the creatures boundaries while ensuring safety. The team erupted in quiet cheers, exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. Lyra allowed herself a brief smile. This was progress. This was humanity's strength in action. Intelligence, adaptability, courage. Jaren approached, handing her a tablet with the day's compiled data. We've recorded every response, every pattern. Tomorrow we'll refine our strategy even further. Lyra nodded. We've done more than survive today. We've taught them something. They know we are not weak, and we've learned everything we need to prepare for the next encounter. As evening fell over the Red Plains, Lyra walked through the colony, checking on teams and equipment. People moved with quiet determination, carrying out tasks with focus and skill. The fear that had gripped the colony was replaced by purpose and confidence. Humans were not powerless. They could fight smart, adapt, and overcome. Outside the observation deck, the twin moons glimmered over the plains. The creatures lingered at a distance, intelligent and cautious. Lyra knew they would return, but she also knew the humans were no longer unprepared. That night, she returned to her lab and began analyzing the day's data in detail. Every energy signature, every reaction, every path was recorded. She adjusted predictions, tested new strategies, and prepared contingency plans. Humanity had gained the upper hand, but Lyra understood that true victory required constant vigilance. Tomorrow, she whispered, we will be stronger, smarter, ready for whatever comes next. Somewhere in the distance, a creature's low growl echoed across the plains, a reminder that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, Lyra felt a quiet confidence. Humanity had struck back, not with brute force, but with intelligence, courage, and unity. Nova Horizon Colony would survive, it would adapt, and it would show that even against unimaginable odds, human ingenuity could prevail. Lyra Kale, the once-mocked outsider, had led them through the first real test, and she was only just beginning. The monsters would return, yes. But humanity would be ready, and in that readiness lay the true strength of the human spirit. The colony awoke to a tense, red-hued morning. Nova Horizon's towers gleamed faintly under the twin suns, but the air was heavy with anticipation. The creatures had been absent for days, and while that might have been a relief for some, Lyra Kale knew better. This calm was temporary. The monsters were intelligent, adaptive, and patient. They were observing, learning, and preparing for another attack. Lyra stood on the observation deck, her hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes scanned the distant red plains where faint shadows shifted, almost imperceptibly under the early sunlight. "They're coming," she said softly. Jaren, standing beside her, nodded, his face tight with tension. "They'll test us," Jaren said. "Do you think we're ready?" "We're not just ready," Lyra replied. "We're prepared. Today we don't just defend, we show them human ingenuity in full." The colony had changed since the first encounters. People who once mocked Lyra now worked as a unified force, following her plans without question. Engineers, scientists, and security personnel moved in synchronized coordination, their roles clearly defined. Energy barriers had been reinforced, drones were ready for rapid deployment, and contingency plans covered every sector of the colony. Lyra called the colony's leadership for a final briefing. On a holographic map, she highlighted the predicted paths of the creatures, marking zones where energy traps could slow their movements and where drones could redirect them. "We have observed their behavior, studied their reactions, and learned their patterns," she explained. "Today we turn that knowledge into control. The officers listened intently, and even those who had doubted her before now nodded. Lyra's calm confidence was infectious. People felt hope for the first time since the attacks began. By mid-morning, the first signals of the creatures' return appeared. Shadows flickered along the horizon, massive forms moving toward the colony with intent. Lyra watched closely, adjusting drone positions and barrier frequencies in real time. "They're faster than yesterday," Jaren noted, concern in his voice. "They've adapted," Lyra said, "but we've adapted too. Stay focused." The first creature approached the outer perimeter, testing the reinforced energy barriers. A drone swooped ahead, projecting a bright pulse of light, diverting it into a predesignated containment zone. The creature resisted, striking the ground with immense force, but the barriers held firm. Lyra noted every reaction, refining predictions for the next creatures. As more creatures arrived, the humans shifted seamlessly into their strategy. Energy fields guided the monsters into controlled paths, drones distracted and redirected, and mobile units reinforced weak points. Each creature that approached was carefully monitored, every movement studied and logged. The colony's citizens watched from safe observation points, witnessing something remarkable. Humans were not running, they were not hiding. They were orchestrating a battle of intellect and strategy, showing courage that inspired everyone present. Lyra led a small team on the outer plains, a calculated risk to ensure the largest creatures could be guided properly. Her team carried portable energy projectors and sensor devices, moving quickly and precisely. "This way!" Lyra shouted, activating a series of light pulses. One massive creature hesitated, then shifted its path, following the intended corridor. Jaren watched from a distance, his eyes wide with admiration. "They're responding," he said, "exactly like you predicted." "Yes," Lyra replied. "Humans think, humans adapt. That's how we survive." The creatures, intelligent and adaptive, began to test new tactics. One particularly large beast attempted to break through a reinforced barrier by striking in rapid succession. Lyra's team quickly adjusted the energy field, reinforcing weak points while drones projected multiple light pulses to confuse and redirect it. The creature paused, almost as if considering its options, then changed direction, following the guidance of human strategy. Every encounter reinforced the humans' confidence. The creatures were strong, but humans were smarter. They had learned to combine courage, ingenuity, and precise coordination, turning what seemed like overwhelming odds into a manageable situation. Midday brought a critical moment. A group of 3 massive creatures converged near the central power grid, where the colony's energy supply was vulnerable. Panic threatened to spread among the engineers, but Lyra acted swiftly. "Activate the diversion drones and projectors now," she commanded. "Force them to split and follow separate paths. Keep them away from the power grid." The team moved with precision. Drones zipped between the creatures, emitting blinding flashes, while energy fields created multiple barriers, forcing the creatures to take different routes. Lyra adjusted frequencies and barrier positions in real time, guiding the monsters toward zones where damage would be minimal. It worked. The creatures were contained, and the colony's power grid remained safe. Lyra allowed herself a brief smile, though her eyes stayed sharp. This was a battle of wits, and the creatures were still learning. By late afternoon, the main attacks had been guided, contained, and neutralized without catastrophic damage. The humans had not destroyed the creatures. They had learned to manage them, to guide their behavior, and to protect the colony at the same time. It was a victory unlike any before, a triumph of intellect, strategy, and courage. As the dust settled, Lyra walked among the teams, checking equipment, reviewing logs, and encouraging exhausted but determined personnel. People came up to her, gratitude and admiration in their eyes. Some who had mocked her before now bowed their heads in respect. "You were right," Jaren said, catching up to her. "Your predictions, your plans, they saved the colony." Lyra shook her head. "Not just me. Humans work together, that's what made the difference. Courage, teamwork, and adaptability, those are our greatest strengths." The colony's leader approached, smiling with relief. "Lyra, the council wants to officially recognize your work. Your research, your strategy, it changed everything. You've proven your vision and your courage." Lyra allowed herself a quiet nod, though she didn't dwell on accolades. There was work to be done. The creatures had returned once, and they would return again. But for now, the colony had survived, and humanity had demonstrated its resilience. That evening, Lyra returned to her lab to analyze the day's data. Every encounter, every reaction of the creatures had been recorded in detail. Patterns had emerged, weaknesses and strengths identified. The knowledge gained today would prepare the colony for the future. As she worked, she reflected on how far things had come. The mocking voices of her peers had faded into memory. Her persistence, her courage, and her belief in human potential had been vindicated. She had trusted her instincts, and in doing so she had shown the colony and the creatures that humans were not to be underestimated. Outside, the twin moons rose over the red plains, casting silver light across the horizon. In the distance, faint shadows moved, but they no longer inspired fear in the humans. The colony had learned to observe, adapt, and act. Humanity's ingenuity had prevailed, turning a seemingly hopeless situation into a controlled engagement. Lyra stood on the observation deck once more, looking out at the horizon. The creatures remained, distant and watchful, but she felt no fear. The colony had survived, and humans had proven that courage and intelligence could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, we will be ready again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Humanity does not give up. Humanity does not surrender. We adapt, we survive, and we thrive. Her thoughts were interrupted by a small voice. A young engineer approached, eyes wide. Miss Kale, will they come back? Yes, Lyra said honestly, but we'll be ready. Humans always are, and will be stronger every time. The engineer smiled, reassured by her words. Around her, others nodded, inspired and determined. Nova Horizon Colony was no longer a place of fear. It was a symbol of human resilience. In the days that followed, Lyra's strategies became standard practice. Observation posts, energy zones, and drone networks were enhanced and refined. Every citizen, from scientists to engineers to security personnel, participated in the ongoing preparation. The colony had become a living example of human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. And Lyra Kale, once mocked and dismissed, became a symbol of human potential. She had proven that insight, courage, and persistence could overcome doubt and ridicule, transforming fear into triumph. On the observation deck, she looked to the horizon, twin moons casting long shadows across the plains. Somewhere out there, the creatures lingered, intelligent and watchful, but Lyra smiled. Humanity had proven its strength, and no challenge, no matter how immense, could stop it. The creatures would return, that was certain. But so would human courage, intelligence, and determination. And that was a force even the most powerful monsters could not ignore. Lyra turned from the horizon, ready to lead her colony into a future filled with exploration, challenge, and possibility. The monsters had taught them one thing: humanity was not weak. Humanity was strong, resourceful, and unyielding, and the universe had just begun to notice.